Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dursey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association and Vice Chair of the New Urbanism Division. And I'm the moderator for today's webcast. Today is Friday, August 14th, and we will hear the presentation, Economic Development 101, Is Your Community Prospect Ready? For technical help during today's webcast, type your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar to the right of your screen, or call the 1-800 number shown in bold. For content questions related to the presentation, you can type those in the questions box, also located in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Coming up on your screen is a list of our sponsoring APA chapters and divisions. Thanks to all of the participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to the members. And today's webcast is sponsored by the Economic Development Division. To learn more about all of APA's divisions, you can visit planning.org/divisions, and to learn about chapters, planning.org/chapters. And coming up on your screen is a list of our upcoming webcasts. To register for these, visit ohioplanning.org/planning webcasts. And to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, visit planning.org, log in, go to your dashboard, and select Activities by Provider. And select today's provider, again, the Economic Development Division, and then select today's title. This webcast has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing only. Some recorded webcasts are available for distance education credit. And for availability of our distance education, just visit our webcast webpage at ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. And you can always like us on Facebook. Just search Planning Webcast Series to receive up-to-date information on our upcoming sessions. We are recording today's webcast, and it will be available on our YouTube channel. You can just search Planning Webcast on YouTube or visit youtube.com/planningwebcast. And a PDF of the PowerPoint will be available after the presentation at our webcast webpage, again, at ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. Okay, so now I would like to introduce today's speaker and get us started. So today's speaker is Joe Hines, currently a partner and principal in charge of the economic development practice at Timmins Group, consulting engineering firm. In his tenure, the economic development practice has helped clients land over $3 billion in announced investment, with over 6,500 jobs created by national and international companies. The economic development practice helps merge the market demands for prospects and site selection consultants with community and site preparedness, and is focused on making our clients prospect ready, helping them prepare for, recruit, and land their next prospect. The practice provides due diligence, site analysis, site selection, prospect recruitment negotiation, infrastructure, and site development. Key projects includes the Rolls-Royce manufacturing facility in Cross Point Center, Amazon.com fulfillment centers, and the Vitamin Shoppe Worldwide Distribution Center, among others. These projects have garnered national and international attention and won several awards, including 2008 Gold Award Project of the Year by Business Facilities Magazine, Rolls-Royce, and 2012 Greater Richmond Area Commercial Real Estate Project of the Year, Amazon.com, and 2013 Industrial Lease of the Year, the Vitamin Shoppe. As a recognized expert in the community, infrastructure, and site preparedness, Joe routinely presents to local, state, and regional organizations and various conferences on what it takes to be prospect ready. Presentations include the Global Logistics Forum presented by the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, the Virginia Tobacco Commission, the Virginia Resources Authority Infrastructure Finance Conference, the Chmura Workforce Boardman Conference, as well as numerous local government boards and regional economic development organizations. In addition, he developed the TG Tier System SM for community and site preparedness and routinely analyzes site and infrastructure, develops site certification programs, and certifies site for various clients. Joe graduated from NC State University with a Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering, summa cum laude, and holds an MBA from the Fuqua School of Business at Duke University. Joe is active in his community and profession as he currently serves on the Alumni Council for the Fuqua School of Business Board of Directors for Virginia Economic Developers Association and was recently appointed to the NC State Engineering Board. With that, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Joe Hines.
Okay, thank you, Christine. Can you see my screen okay now?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay, thank you. Again, thank you, Christine, for that wonderful introduction. My marketing department evidently did a pretty good job of putting my bio together because I'm not sure I actually recognize that person that she reeled on about. Hi, as Christine noted, my name is Joe Hines. I'm a director/partner and principal in charge of the economic development practice at Timmins Group, based out of Richmond, Virginia. I must admit, when I first saw the list of almost 900 registrants from Alaska to California to Florida to New Hampshire, I thought, wow, everyone must be excited about this topic, or I'm a lot more popular than I realized. I then talked to one of my colleagues, Andy Bano, who has done a couple of these APA webinars, and he said, Joe, I don't think it's you or your topic as much as it is everyone needs to get in their AICP continuing education credits before the end of the year. So certainly that burst my bubble. But needless to say, if you're here for your AICP credits or because you have an interest in this topic, your time is valuable, and I sincerely appreciate you taking the time to sit in on this webinar. On a more serious note, I would like to thank you all for your time today, and the American Planning Association, in particular, John Provo from Virginia Tech and Christine Davis from APA Ohio, for allowing me to present on a topic I'm very, very passionate about. Creation of jobs and investment through economic development and community preparedness. Today's presentation is entitled Economic Development 101. Is your community prospect ready? Now, we're going to cover a lot of ground here in the next 50 minutes or so. So if you all stay with me until the end, I don't think you will be disappointed, and promise it'll definitely be well worth your time. So given the broad reach of the audience, I want to give you a brief overview of Timmins Group because some of you guys might not be aware of who we are. We're a professional services and technology firm based out of Richmond, Virginia, which is Virginia's capital, and have been an Engineering News Record Top 500 design firm for over 20 consecutive years. We have experience in all aspects of economic development, engineering, environmental, and technology services as it relates to site identification, as well as site development and infrastructure development and economic development. In 2014, we performed work in 32 states, which covers a lot of the same states we have people participating in this webinar. So again, thank you for your time today. Now moving on to our agenda. Here's an overview and agenda for today. Some of the things I'll be discussing are trends in economic development, who is your target audience, basics on infrastructure and park development, understanding your product and your target markets, preparing your community for success, and the site visit and afterwards, closing the deal. Trends in economic development, a consultant's perspective. First, I'd like to point out that really prospects and consultants are looking at regions and not necessarily sites or localities. These projects are now moving in months, whereas before, back in the early 80s and early 90s, maybe they were moving, you know, take 2 to 3 years for a project to come to fruition. But with the technology that's advanced the profession, we're starting to see how quickly these projects move, and I'll show a slide shortly in the presentation which kind of helps you identify that. So speed to market matters. They need ready-to-go sites. The internet obviously has transformed the process like it has for many other things or other businesses. And they're looking for solutions and not sales. Everybody can recognize a sales pitch just because you have a field out in the middle of nowhere and you have a water tank nearby, and a VDOT or DOT road entrance doesn't necessarily make it a good fit for that project. And the other point I want to make is that incentives do matter, but they only matter after you become a finalist. So the biggest takeaway I think I can give to planners and local economic development officials is you actually have to recognize that pretty much 100% of your success is about 70 to 80% out of your control. So what do you want to do? You want to control that 20 to 30% that can increase your odds for success. So we're obviously based out of Virginia, and we do a lot of work with several state economic development agencies. One of the perspectives that we were given about a Virginia Economic Development Partnership is roughly 60% of their inquiries are for existing buildings. I know in talking with Buzz Knupp, who is a well-known site selector in the Southeast United States, he mentioned that about 75% of his clients come in looking for buildings versus sites, but about 25% of them actually go into an existing building, and about 75% go to greenfield sites. The other interesting perspective was about 70,000 square foot was the median size industrial building people were looking for, and 95 to 97,000 square foot was about the average size. The one thing that really stands out to us overall, especially in the regions that we serve, is there really is a lack of 100+ acre ready-to-go sites, because it appears that they exist throughout, that they don't appear to exist throughout the most of the country, especially near the urban corridors. So a lot of times the smart money has already bought up the good property to develop it. So from a local government perspective, you're usually dealing with a site that has some hair on it, and you have to work through some issues as far as that's concerned. So beginning with the end in mind, one of the things we track each year is the Site Selection Magazine Site Selectors Top Location Criteria. We've been tracking this since about 2007, 2008. And if you look at this particular ranking, 6 of the top 10 criteria are somewhat controllable on the local level. So the other thing that I thought was interesting in 2012, one of the criteria that popped into this ranking was the local economic development strategy. What we're seeing is a lot of localities or prospects want to make sure the localities are committed to their long-term success once they come there. So that local economic development strategy from a business retention expansion perspective is very important to localities, because what they don't want to, or prospects, what they don't want to do is locate to a particular locale or a site and then be forgotten about. So that's very, very important to it. Transportation infrastructure, utility infrastructure, land, building prices and supply, ease of the permitting and regulatory procedures. Do you have fast track permitting in place? And then again, availability of incentives. So why do you need to be prospect ready? Really, opportunities lost and opportunities gained. In Virginia, we were one of the potential finalist sites for a Caterpillar site that ultimately located into Athens, Georgia. It was about a $200 million investment, 1,400 jobs, and according to a study done in Georgia, it had about a $2.4 billion regional impact. What was interesting about that was evidently Caterpillar made a decision to move from Japan in early November. They hired their site selection consultant the week of Thanksgiving. He came around and did site visits the first week in December. He told us on that site visit that they were going to have to make a decision by February and literally start construction in March. The requirements were 200 acres, shovel ready, and cleared of all the environmental issues with the site. A tough bill to fill. So they actually met their schedule. I was reluctant about that when we first met with them, and they actually started construction on time, and so it gives you an idea of how quickly these guys are moving. The next one I'd like to talk about is Opportunities One. Amazon.com, which didn't even exist when I graduated from college in 1991. Around 2012, they decided to put about 15 million square foot of distribution centers on the ground, several 1 million square foot facilities. Dinwiddie and Chesterfield in Virginia ended up reaping the reward of a fulfillment and a non-fulfillment center. It was a sum total of $135 million investment, 1,350 jobs announced, but to date there have been over 3,600 jobs created. What was interesting about this was our clients had the opportunity to go out and visit with these executives for Amazon in Seattle, and they each had 15 minutes with the executives for Amazon to pitch their locality and pitch their sites. So that shows you how important it is to be ready to go when you get the phone call. So back to the point about how fast are prospects moving. This is a graph of the initial timeline for the initial contact. That's the day they contact the local government until an announcement has been made. These 8 projects range from anywhere from 2 to 9 months. It was about $2.4 billion investment and over 10,000 jobs announced. Okay, the average timeline from initial contact until they made an announcement was 5 months. And you see Caterpillar moved a lot quicker, and then Boeing made a decision to leave Washington State and move to South Carolina in less than 2 months. Matter of fact, I talked to the gentleman who led their site selection process, and he noted they actually closed the deal in less than 45 days, but they announced it roughly 2 months after they made the initial contact. The other important thing to recognize here is once these prospects land, the potential for expansion is pretty significant. So in July of 2014 at the North Charleston facility in South Carolina, Boeing announced an additional $1.1 billion investment and an additional 2,000 jobs would be added to that facility. I was able to go by and visit the site a couple of weeks ago, and it's amazing how quickly they're moving that project forward. So a lot of people say, Joe, that's nice about the bigger projects, but what about the smaller projects? We have a plan that we want to get smaller projects, smaller capital, and jobs created in here. How quickly are those moving? This is a real-world example of Project Casper with Acme Smoked Fish. Believe it or not, there is an Acme company out there that is not related to Wile E. Coyote. But we had the initial contact locality in early June. We had the response to the RFP by June 15th. We had the first site visit that following Monday on June 19th. They had a short list of sites by the 25th. We had our second site visit on July 8th. Then we were invited to go to New York for a negotiation session where they brought 2 states in to negotiate to figure out which was going to be the best site, and a decision was made by August 12th. So that timeline was 2.5 months for a $27 million investment and 104 jobs. And most of my clients would absolutely love to have had that job. Now, one of the things I always say about this business is there's always a criteria sitting in the back of somebody's mind that helps make that decision, of which you don't really know about until after the game is over with. In this particular case, one of the things that helped them make a decision about locating to Pender County, North Carolina, just outside of Wilmington, was the fact that the Wilmington airport had a direct flight to LaGuardia that was able to shuttle their executives back and forth, and they had ease of access to their site from their main headquarters in Brooklyn, New York. So not only are the announcements being made in relatively short order, once they get on the ground, they're actually moving dirt and bringing these facilities up in fairly quick time frame. As far as this was concerned, the Vitamin Shop project, we had the governor's announcement on August 31st. Within 3 weeks, they had a 312,000 square foot pad graded out on the site, literally working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by the grading contractor. And then in 2.5 months, with tilt-up construction, they had the walls up. We literally had them moving equipment in the week before the governor's announcement. We had to have all the site plans approved. We had to have everything ready to go. So literally the day they made the announcement at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they were moving dirt at 2:30 that day. 8 months later, they had the facility substantially complete, and they were actually moving product into it. And that's very similar to the Amazon.com facilities that went up. They had a 9-month development timeline as well too. So really, who is your target audience? You've got the prospects themselves, you've got the site selection consultants, you've got the big boys like Deloitte, KPMG, You have a lot of smaller shops, which are usually 1 to 10 person shops as far as site selectors are concerned. Then you have the commercial real estate brokers. What's been interesting is to watch their evolution into the site selection game over the last 5 years or so. I think as technology advances itself, what the commercial real estate brokers such as CBRE or Jones Lang LaSalle are understanding is they have a tremendous amount of data of which they can leverage to help prospects find sites and businesses find sites. So they're really starting to show up a lot more today than they were 5 years ago. Then you have the preferred developers. And these are guys who are willing to sign on the dotted line, guys like Red Rock or Seafree Development or McDonald Development. They're willing to sign on the dotted line and say, okay, we will deliver your facility by September 1, 2015, or else we will pay $10,000 a day liquidated damages because we know Amazon.com needs to start moving product in so they can meet the Christmas season, which is the busiest season of the year for Amazon. So what are the prospects looking for? They're looking for the best business decision. They want to know logistically, will the site work? Can they get their product to and from where they need to go? Is the cost of developing that product or making that product cost effective for them? Can they get product in and out to the ports or going overseas if they need to? They're also looking for a community that fits or a site or a building that fits. Curb appeal and sense of place are very important to these companies, and a place where their employees have amenities. What was interesting in the Vitamin Shop deal was we had lunch in downtown Ashland, Virginia, and it was very interesting because they started talking about certain things that went on in Ashland, and the gentleman who was leading the site search for Vitamin Shop actually said, oh, well, we have a corporate culture that is interested in something like that. In this particular case, it was a MS bike ride, and it ended up, they made a connection at lunchtime that ended up making it a very strong cultural fit that put them clearly in a front runner seat as they were moving forward with the site selection process. It felt good to them. So what are the site selection consultants and real estate brokers looking for? Really, it's a site elimination process. As I've had one site selector tell me, I've got 3,500 locales in the United States that I need to get down to 10 and down to 3, usually within 60 to 90 days of contact from a client. So obviously they're looking for anything that they can do to eliminate a site. As such, because technology is there and the internet has transformed things, 80 to 90% of that search has been completed prior to that first contact. They've got to have the ready-to-go sites. They've got to have the utilities and infrastructure in place. They need thorough site due diligence. And then, of course, at the end of the day, these guys are sharks in the water. They want incentives and commissions for their particular clients. So what are the preferred developers looking for? They're looking for the elimination of unknowns and risk. As we mentioned, they're the ones who are willing to sign on the dotted line saying, we will be glad to deliver this product and take a liquidated damages clause with it, but they need to know what can trip me up along the way. Do I have an issue with getting a Corps of Engineers permit? In the case of Amazon, they actually had to account for bad soils on the site, so they talked to local quarries and basically said, can you reserve 300,000 tons of stone dust for us so we can mitigate potentially bad or wet soils during a bad construction season? And they ended up using about all that. Do they have certainty of schedule? Do you have a fast-track permitting process in place? Can I have my engineering plans approved literally before they make the announcement or before I start construction? They need to know the control of their development costs, both infrastructure and site development costs, because they need to mitigate those risks. Again, it's both a schedule risk and a cost risk for their clients. And then how quickly can I start construction? The site plan approval and construction contract in place. They're always negotiating and they're working through construction contracts to get to the point where they can sign that deal and literally move equipment in as soon as the announcement's made. So now one of the things we were doing a few years back was we were working a lot of these economic development deals and starting to see some trends within the industry of what site selectors and prospects were looking for in terms of where their sites were in the development process. As such, in early 2012, we sat down and we started things out, what we call essentially a tiering system to determine where in rank sites were that prospects were picking up and what were all the items that were being done. And we looked at it from a development timeline perspective as the primary driver, and then a cost perspective as a secondary driver. And looking at this particular tiering system, we set it up such essentially a tier 1 site was raw land, willing seller, no control. Tier 2 was a site that was controlled, zoned, comp plan, minimal due diligence in place. Tier 3 was master plan, estimated costs, significant due diligence on site. Tier 4 was where you make some significant infrastructure investment, and that's a certifiable site. You've got most of your property issues cleared. And then a Tier 5 was ready to construct, permits in hand. As soon as you give me the go, I will have equipment out there moving forward. So why is this important? I looked at it in terms of gambler's odds. If you take a successful gambler, he really only has to win 2 out of 3 times to stay ahead as far as coming out ahead as far as gambling is concerned. So what we try to do is we try to frame this up in terms of, are you in a position where you're increasing your odds to that 70 to 80% or higher range? And again, that goes back to what we call gambler's odds. We realize that there's a timeline associated with this. This timeline sometimes has to transcend political elections, which is stuff on the local government side. You also have to look at your financial investment. So if you look at the column to the far right, you can see up until about the point you get to a Tier 3 site, that's where you're starting your master planning and due diligence. That's where you have to start spending some money. It's actually fairly low cost on a per acre basis, but then when you jump from a Tier 3 to a Tier 4, that's when you start getting into millions of dollars and public bonds being issued and items like that. And then to go to the next step, a shovel pad ready site, we're normally seeing that as being $50,000 to $150,000 an acre, depending on your site and your risk associated with it. So there are 2 very distinct differences as far as what we think elected officials really kind of latch onto. One is the product development. So really in Tier 1 through 3, you're developing your product to get into the game. Are you lacking infrastructure and or sites? Do you have you still have to have a substantial investment of time, money, and political capital? And I think political capital is one of the biggest ones you need to keep in mind. You have sites, but they're lacking due diligence. You have substantial permitting hurdles. Do you need to start a permitting process with the Corps of Engineers? And it can take multiple years to develop that into a marketable product. Then you have what we call the product fulfillment stage, which is essentially a Tier 4 or Tier 5 site. And again, going back to the gambler's odds of 70% or better odds of success once you become a finalist site. At that point in time, you're in the game. You actually have a mature product with infrastructure and ready to go sites. You are proactively marketing that site for the region, locality, and then the site is routinely being shown to active prospects. So it's just a matter of time before you find that appropriate fit that's going to come along. So when you look at this in terms of major considerations, I initially set up the tier system as Tier 1 through 5. After I rolled this out in a webinar, I had a bunch of my clients and a bunch of people call me up and say, hey Joe, I have nothing, can you add a Tier 0 to this? So we said, sure, be glad to. So we added a Tier 0, you have nothing and you need to find sites. So when you look at the steps in the process and what's important, the Tier 0 is essentially you're in the site selection identification process. Tier 1, you're kind of in the site negotiation range. Tier 2, you're looking at site control and zoning. Tier 3 is your planning and your due diligence, getting all that completed. Tier 4, you're making the big leap there, and that's when you make the infrastructure investment and you have a certifiable site. Doesn't mean that it's certified, but it means it can easily be certifiable. And then Tier 5 is a shovel-ready or pad-ready site, again, which is what the boys at Caterpillar were looking for. So where a lot of people stand, they stand at Tier 0. So when you look at where Rolls-Royce went or a number of other mega sites went, they went to essentially a Tier 3 or better site. Amazon went to a Tier 4 site, and again, Caterpillar went to a Tier 5 site. So why do you want to play this game? And it's a substantial investment to get a site ready to go. But you know what? The potential rewards are there, even for a small site. A lot of clients said, you know, Joe, I can't afford to go big or go home. And we put this graph together, and you know what? It's not a go big or go home situation. If you look at what's less than 100 acres, there's pretty substantial investment and pretty substantial jobs created from that, ranging from you know, $27 million investment to a $90 million investment from 70 jobs up to 1,000 jobs. Even modest ones can be 150 jobs. For the medium-sized sites, the 100 to 500 acre sites, again, the investment can range from 90+ million to $1 billion, and from 60 or 70 jobs up to 1,400 jobs. So it's pretty significant. Now, the other one is the big go big or go home, and that's the mega sites. And I know a bunch of other people out there want to pursue mega sites. I think it's a worthwhile pursuit if you have the product that can be developed out there. Sometimes you have to keep in mind that if there's 1,000 or 2,000 acre tract available, there is a reason why 1,000 or 2,000 acres is available out in the middle of nowhere. So you have to look at it through that lens. But you can see there are very, very substantial investments and very substantial jobs created. One of the things I want to point out is about the Toyota and Volkswagen facilities. We were working with 2 separate clients in Virginia who were in the running for those particular projects. Part of the reason why they were eliminated was the land acquisition and development timeline issues were problematic for both Volkswagen and Toyota. So I was actually going to present to the Virginia Tobacco Commission, which took the settlement funds. For those of you who are not aware of what that is, it took the settlement funds from this big tobacco settlement a number of years back, and basically we're investing it in Southside Virginia to reinvest in economic development and in sites. So they decided they were going to put $100 million aside to develop mega sites for Virginia and the historically tobacco producing locales in Virginia. So I was actually presenting to them on May 24th, 2012 about the importance of this program. Literally walking to the hotel the night before, and this is the headline in USA Today. Auto plants roar into overdrive. Demand drives overtime and hiring. Volkswagen was adding 800 workers, and Toyota was adding more than 1,000 jobs to 5 U.S. plants. So again, going back to Boeing making an announcement to expand their facility in July 2014, these guys made announcements at the plants that my clients were in the hunt for back in 2006 and 2007. So again, once they get there, they expand and they move forward. So now from a planning perspective, which is my understanding a lot of planners are on the line right now, what can you do to increase your odds of success in the future? And really what it comes down to is the development timelines for these projects, one, have to transcend elections, and two, can be very, very significant. So obviously you need to start the planning process early on. Most transportation projects take anywhere from 15 to 20 years to happen, and when you're looking at developing a site, it can be somewhere between 15 and 20 years. If you have a politically motivated board, it can happen a lot sooner, but you have to set the realistic expectation that it is going to take time, the odds are it's going to take time, and you're not going to rush this through a process. So what are some of the things you need to keep in mind as you're master planning for your future? One, have you got your due diligence items completed? Two, what are the transportation issues associated with that particular site that you're trying to develop? Three, water and wastewater. Can you accommodate stormwater? And then what are you going to do with your private utilities? So trying to get to the point where we actually have a marketable product so you can close the deal, a tier 4 or tier 5 site, you need to do due diligence, because that's what can kill a deal in a heartbeat. Because if you have an archaeological issue, if you have a cemetery show up, if you don't have a wetlands delineation that's been confirmed by the Corps of Engineers that you can go through the ease of a permitting process, that can kill a project in a heartbeat and get you eliminated. So you need to eliminate those unknowns or those risks. So these items have been addressed: cultural resources, environmental site assessments, wetlands, utilities, service providers. Have you talked to your power company? Have you talked to your natural gas provider about what it's going to take to get power and natural gas to the site? Have you done your geotechnical and subsurface investigation? That's very, very important. Groundwater plays a significant role in a lot of prospects' decisions. Do you have your zoning in place? Do you have your ownership and property control taken care of? And have you removed all your easements and encumbrances? You need to eliminate these unknowns before they eliminate you. I alluded to transportation planning. Transportation planning has probably got the longest lead time of any of the items you need to take into consideration. As you're looking to select sites or develop sites, a couple of things you do need to keep in mind is access to 4-lane highways. Well, I would like to say there are some localities out there who don't have 4-lane highways, I would like to be able to go and say, hey, you guys are in a great position to be successful in economic development. The reality is you need a 4-lane highway, whether it's a U.S. highway or an interstate nearby and available for people to be able to move product and goods in and out. Intersections versus interchange, that can actually make a big difference when you're developing a park. The interchange allows the opportunity for you not to have to sit through stoplights to get in and out of the park and get you traveling quicker and moving that product sooner. Have you done a traffic impact analysis? Have you done any turn lane warning analysis or signal warning analysis? Those are important things to keep in mind from a transportation planning perspective. Next year, the wet utilities, what we historically call wet utilities for water planning. You know, some things you need to keep in mind are capacity considerations, storage and distribution. Fire flows are a big consideration with prospects now. And do you have the adequate storage and pressure available? The thing about fire flows is you normally need to have about 2,000 gallons per minute for at least 2 hours at a minimum residual pressure of 40 psi. So that's pretty significant to a system if you don't have a water tank nearby, because you need to make sure you have the adequate pipes in the ground to be able to deliver that water at that time. You can do fire flow testing, but that's a very important issue. The other thing is sizing of the elevated storage tanks. To meet that criteria, you need to have a minimum of 240,000 gallons required fire storage. Some insurance companies like to see 2,500 gallons per minute. Some like to see 3,000 gallons a minute. So that storage requirement only goes up with that. So normally what you'll see is kind of a minimum size 500,000 gallon tank at most economic development parks throughout the states. Next item is wastewater planning. You need to keep items in mind like capacity, collection, and pumping systems. We had one client who was actively pursuing the semiconductor industry back in the late 80s, early 90s. They more or less overbuilt their system to handle 30 to 40 million gallons a day of effluent, of wastewater. Ironically, semiconductor business kind of went down, went dry, but they were able to use that infrastructure, and it gave them flexibility moving forward with the development of that site. And they were able to get a high water user at the end of the day who was able to use that site. So they were able to make sure that they had accommodated that. The industry they planned for failed, but then they had another industry come along that was able to take advantage of that. So what are some of the design considerations you need to take in mind? Your capacity and expandability, your process flexibility. One of the things we see is the food industry. They have high BODs, which essentially is something that needs to be treated with a lot of aeration. Normally they're required with pretreatment, but for the last 3 brewery projects we've seen, they've located locales where locality has been able to say, yes, we can handle your high BOD waste because we have process flexibility within our system. Another thing we're starting to see a lot of is reuse. I know it's not as predominant here on the East Coast as it is on the West Coast, but essentially that's a purple pipe. You're seeing that for cooling systems, irrigation systems, items like that. So water is very precious. We understand that, and you need to keep all these items in mind when you're planning for your wastewater future for a park and or your locality. Stormwater. Stormwater is an ever-changing regulatory environment. It's one that you always kind of have to keep a close eye on, and it's very important that you understand what your potential options are as far as the site is concerned. You have to worry about water quality and water quantity. We're starting to see a lot of use of low impact developments on sites. And one question that always seems to come up is, do I need to do on-site for development, or do I need to do regional basins for development of park? Unfortunately, we're starting to see the regulatory environment trend towards the on-site versus the regional basins. So a lot of people who have made investments in regional basins are able to get that grandfathered, but you're not able to get that approved nowadays where maybe you were 10 years ago. So your private or your dry utilities, where do they go? You've got electrical power you need to be concerned about, natural gas, communications. You really need to plan for these guys coming in and locating somewhere on your site, because they can consume a lot of land if you aren't careful, and they can compromise a lot of land if you aren't careful. So you need to plan for these utilities up front, and it's very important. So what we like to see normally for development of an economic development park is underground power. Most power companies are very flexible when it comes to this. If you give them the ability to do that, they will work with you as far as that's concerned. You need to have your natural gas easements in place, and you need to have your high-speed communications and infrastructure in place. Normally what we do is we identify corridors along where we install the roads, and we make sure that we have enough room for water, sewer, underground power, natural gas, and high-speed communications infrastructure. And normally you have to put easements on both sides of the road because a lot of them don't like to share or be on the same side of the road as each other. So all this is building up to essentially where you can close the deal. And you need to figure out your development costs, your money and the prospect's money when it comes right down to it. The important thing to keep in mind here is as a locale is you need to know your limits. When do you go from a good deal to a bad deal? And that's the same thing for the prospect too. So if you've done your due diligence and planning up front, the easier it's going to be for you to assess your costs and your timelines for development, which are very critical to closing that deal. The other aspect you got to keep in mind is, can the prospect assess his cost of development? In other words, the biggest variability we see in any deal is the site and infrastructure cost. Every prospect and every architect and every contractor can tell you almost to the dollar how much that building costs from the ground up on a per square foot basis. What a lot of people don't understand is the variability that goes with the infrastructure and site and the cost to develop those particular items. So when you're closing deals, you've got state economic development partnerships stepping up and giving millions of dollars towards closing the deal. You need to understand where those limits are. This is going to cost the locality $6 million to close this deal, and can they essentially take money from the deal closing fund for the governor or for some other organization, EDA, tobacco region, and utilize that to help close the gap so they can make this deal done, a done deal. What's interesting is the site selection consultants know where that money is, and they come in and they ask for it, and they ask for as much as they can. The big thing is making sure you understand your infrastructure requirements, water, sewer, and transportation. Can you easily assess what you need to do to extend the water and sewer line? Can you assess what it takes to get a bridge over an existing railroad track, because somebody might not want to have an at-grade crossing to get into a site. They might want to go over the site and into it, but you don't want to make that investment up front until that prospect lands. And then understanding the cost of utilities and service providers, both power and natural gas. Historically, they always give you an it depends answer on what it will cost. But the sooner you can start that dialogue or discussions with those companies, the better off you are, because again, you're getting prepared to close that deal with a prospect. What are some other considerations you need to keep in mind moving forward? What amenities can you provide, and how will your employees spend their days? Can you put walking trails around the site? Jogging trails? Can you actually host a concert out there? What we see a lot of locales do is in the early stages of development, if the topography is advantageous, they'll do kind of like a little amphitheater, and they'll host concerts out there. So they'll generate activity on that particular site to know, one, that the taxpayers' money is being spent well, and then two, to increase visibility of that site that they're trying to market to economic development prospects. All right, next I want to talk about understanding your product and the target markets. A lot of people just don't understand the target markets they're going after in terms of an infrastructure and a site perspective. Economic development is a numbers game. A lot of people will waste a lot of time submitting on projects that just don't fit. So that's a little bit frustrating for everybody involved, both from our end, working as site selection consultants, as well as doing a site analysis study for site selection consultants, is people just don't understand that product. So you get a bunch of product being submitted to you that doesn't necessarily fit the criteria of what you're looking for. A lot of people do target market analysis. So one locale we worked in, or region we worked in, had agribusiness, food processing and beverage, advanced manufacturing, IT data centers, logistics distributions, and we looked at the other business sectors located in those regions. So we essentially went through and we identified what the infrastructure and the site requirements were for those particular industries. We tabled it out and we said, okay, do the existing sites you have or buildings you have in your product mix meet the criteria of your target markets. We looked at items like building size or acreage range. Is it a single or multi-story building? What are your traffic demands? What are your water, wastewater demands? What are your power demands? What are your potential natural gas demands? So we do what we call a getting it on the green approach, where we take a look at the site, we look at all the configuration, the environmental constraints, and we basically try to lay out what I call smart test fits, where we lay out items on the site that we know will work from a buildable perspective. So we're trying to get in that, again, that 70% plus accuracy range to make sure that people understand really what their product is that they can submit when a prospect comes along. So the last thing you want to do is have a site that's going to need a 1 million square foot facility and submit it and realize that it just doesn't work for that. The other thing about understanding your product is, again, have you completed that necessary due diligence? And what are your limitations on your site? Do you know what your limitations are politically with it as well too, and what size facilities can you accommodate? Another one that's always interesting is how quickly can you respond to that RFI? We did a site analysis study for a region, and I sent out about a 40-question questionnaire, and I've seen RFIs as long as 200 questions, but really there are only about 40 that really matter most often than not, and that seem to be common among all those. And it took them about 2 months to respond to me. You normally need to be able to respond usually sometimes within 2 days and sometimes within a week, if not 2 weeks. So that's one thing you always want to do, is make sure that you understand what are those items that you need to answer from that questionnaire, and can I get those items done? Now, I realize due diligence is a costly thing. It is probably anywhere from $100,000 to $250,000 plus investment on each particular site, and sometimes it's a big step for a locality. But on a per acre basis, that's significantly cheaper than investing millions upon millions of dollars into the infrastructure of that site, knowing that it might not work. Another question I often get asked is shell buildings. If you build it, will they come? Well, we've seen over the last 5 years, spec space has dropped tremendously. And now we're starting to see it coming back in certain markets, like Atlanta is one of the markets that's coming back, Memphis, Tennessee, it's coming back. So people were actually starting to reinvest in spec space again. But the reality is, should a locality make that investment into a shell building or not? If you go back to 60 plus to 70 plus % of the inquiries are looking for a building, then yes, it makes sense to potentially have a building. Is 100,000 the magic number? Okay, that seems to be the magic number. So we're working with one locality that's made a decision. We're going to go ahead and invest into a 50,000 square foot facility and make it expandable to 100,000 square foot, because we want to be able to capitalize at the minimum on that traffic it will generate. And that way, if they come here and they look at this building, you know, we've got 4 or 5 other sites we can show them. So they're almost using it as a marketing and an investment, and their hope is they can actually have the building sold before we're done constructing it. So let's get down to the difference between building a building and retrofitting an existing facility, a greenfield site versus an existing building. What was interesting is when we were working with Rolls-Royce had never, ever done a greenfield development. They had done everything in an existing facility. So we worked with them on the Cross Point Center site just south of Richmond, and they actually had to learn the process, the development process, and they had a lot of questions that, you know, people just didn't quite understand across the pond as to what it took to develop a site. So it was a pretty big education process. Now, in terms of the Vitamin Shop project or the Amazon projects, that delta to retrofit a building and to build a brand new building can be as short as 60 to 90 days. Sometimes that 60 to 90 days matters, sometimes it doesn't. But it's always something to keep in mind that you can condense it down to that short of a time frame. So a lot of people are willing to do the build-to-suits versus trying to retrofit. As I mentioned, Buzz Knupp said 75% of his people come in looking for buildings, 25% leave getting a building, 75% leave getting a greenfield site. So let's do a case study, talk about a case study right now. This is Southampton County, about being prospect ready gets results. They made a decision to invest in a Tier 5 pad ready site. We were able to install an environmental bank associated with the park. It was a former agricultural tract, looked great on the ground, showed well the prospects. They had drain tiles underneath it. The Corps of Engineers fell in love with the site, and they said, hey, why don't you guys put an environmental bank? So we developed an environmental bank on about half the site, which actually is going to generate probably more revenue than the remainder of the site once it builds out. They had an announcement from Viva wood pellets coming in there. But what's important is once the State Economic Development Agency realized this product was ready to go, they had 18 submissions for prospects in 24 months. This is a 200-plus acre pad-ready, shovel-ready site. The county had made the investment, the political investment, to invest $13 million in land acquisition and infrastructure. They did a $30 million wastewater system upgrade. Took them over 8 years to develop. They ended up being a Caterpillar finalist, but unfortunately they had to pull the deal off the table at the last minute because they had a bird in hand versus one in the bush with Caterpillar. And there was the Enviva groundbreaking on July 20th of the year they made the announcement. As I noted, there was an investment in infrastructure. Here's the $30 million plant, and we had a big pump station and sewer lines out in the system, but essentially this ended up winning the Rural Water Authority System of the Year and was a design build project of the year for locale. We went through the master planning process with them, development zones. Can we handle the small and medium flex space? Can we handle large warehouse and support facilities? And then can we have a rail access site? Because that's, rail access was running along the west side of the site, as you can see on that picture. So this is Kevin Costner's Field of Dreams, and this was Southampton County's Field of Dreams. What was interesting is, as this project was evolving, we had literally everything came to a head in 1 week. Talking about the political aspect of things, the county administrator had just had a flip of his board from the election in early November. He had a 7-0 pro-economic development board to flip the 4 board members flipped out to a 4-3 anti-economic development because they'd spent a bunch of money on the site. Literally, we had Project Roadrunner or Caterpillar show up on a Monday. They absolutely loved the site. Enviva had optioned a piece of property nearby, and they went to a public hearing on a Wednesday night, took a bloodbath for the rezoning process. Thursday, they decided they were going to pull the rezoning application and sit down with the county and try to negotiate buying the Turner Track site. I got a call at 9 a.m. that morning saying that Southampton had closed the deal with Enviva. The pressure from the incoming supervisors was we need to take a bird in hand versus one in the bush. And later that afternoon, we found that they would have been a finalist for Caterpillar. So what is your competition doing? They're being aggressive. There's a lot of state certified programs out there. I believe there are 26 states that have site certification programs. They're all recognizing how important it is to make sure a product is ready to go because of the all too important aspect of closing and deal with prospects that need and ready to go sites. So how prepared is your community, and what do your elected officials need to realize? One, they need to realize economic development is a team game. Everyone needs to come ready to win, okay? Again, it has to be something that transcends elections. So right now, as far as public officials are concerned, they have to make a decision sometimes. Am I going to make a decision to invest millions of dollars that I know will not have a return before I'm up for election again and I could potentially lose my seat, or am I going to do the right thing and invest in the long-term future of the county? And we have that discussion in closed session on a regular basis with them. That was me presenting the master plan for Rolls-Royce in August 2006, and here we are in 2014. A very well-developed site, got pads out there, and Rolls-Royce is working on a 3rd facility right now. So preparing your community. Do you understand your product and potential markets? Have you invested in the infrastructure, sites, and site readiness? Do you have a fast-track permitting process in place? That's very, very important. For a larger locale, it's a lot more sophisticated of a review process. For a smaller locale, they can usually run that through relatively quickly and approve that without much difficulty. Have you removed any political process and public involvement whenever possible? That will eliminate a site quickly. Do you need to go to rezoning? Do you have to have a special use permit? Those things are deal killers. Do you understand your revenue, incentives, and tax structure? And the importance of non-disclosure agreement. I cannot emphasize that enough because there are lots of times where elected officials will come out of closed session wanting to tell somebody what's going on, and that can kill a deal and has in the past. So going back to increasing your odds for success, you need to complete all your due diligence items up front. You need to clear all your property issues, or at least all the ones you can identify. You need to get to the highest tier possible, tier 4, tier 5. You need to educate your elected officials and staff on what it takes to be successful in economic development. You got to have that fast track permitting process in place, at least to the point that you can commit to it when the prospect shows up. And you need to know what your cost and revenue generators are. As I had one of my clients say, Joe, I need to know that point where I go from a good deal to a bad deal, because no deal is better than a bad deal. So you're in the hunt, the day of the site visit. A lot has happened right to get you to that point, but you're still one of 6 to 10, okay? You need to make sure your site shows well. Go up there, clean up any trash on the entrance, groom the areas where you're going to drive the prospect in. Make sure you have presentation graphics available. You need to have a team of experts available. You need to know your site better than the prospect or their consultant. You also need can-do people involved and be a problem solver. We had one client where the engineer, and I'm an engineer and I love them to death, he was director of utilities, talked about the fact that the power went down for 7 days, but he was bragging about the fact that he has water and sewer system back up within 24 hours. As he kept bragging about that, the prospect essentially looked at him and said, well, let me ask you a question. Why did the site take so long to get back up power, and am I on the same circuit as what you lost power to? And so he was bragging about something he thought was important, but it ended up exposing something that was not very favorable for the site or to the prospect. You need to survive that site elimination process, and you need to make them feel good. When we do these site visits, you're looking for a feel. You can tell whether a locality is enthusiastic, or the economic development officials are enthusiastic and are willing to work with you. And you always need to ask questions. Look for that decision-making criteria they just aren't telling you about. Another common mistake we see is people do not recognize the fact that people need to visualize, a prospect needs to visualize a site. So you need to make sure you can do that. This is really what you want them to see. You want them to see a conceptual master plan. You want to have them see a rendering on the site. These renderings are fairly easy to do. Most prospects, probably 90% of them, already have an existing facility somewhere. So you can look that up on Google Earth, and you can almost render that onto that site. In this particular case, that's what we did here. What they will probably see field and trees. So again, the importance of them having a graphic as you're riding through a site is the most important thing, because you can point out exactly where items are and say, here's where the corner of that building would be when you build this out, so it can help them visualize. So from the prospect or consultant's perspective, the day of the site visit, at that point in time, you pretty much already have your top 2 or 3 sites have been chosen in your mind. Even though you're visiting 6 to 10, you know which ones are your top sites. They're looking to validate the information they have. They're looking for the feel of that community. Do they feel welcome? Do they feel like they can make a home there? You got to recognize you might be a pawn in a negotiating game. And then they might be gathering info for their next client. So every site visit is an educational process for that site selection consultant that he's getting paid for by another prospect. So follow up, what can set you apart? Be proactive. Your site visit will start to blend in with the others, because we normally hit sites anywhere from 4 to 6 in a day. We've done as many as 10 in a day from sun up to sundown, and your sites start mixing in with everything else. If the people don't make notes when they're there, they start getting mixed in. They really don't understand the differences between them until somebody helps point them back out. Send a thank you note. One of the things I think is lost a lot now is a handwritten note. So consider sending a handwritten note to either the prospect and or the site selection consultant, because I think that genuinely shows you care. You need to respond quickly to requests, usually within 24 to 48 hours, and don't be afraid to be persistent, because that helps you stand out. So you're still in the game, closing the deal. If you're a finalist site, things will move very, very fast. At that point in time, you're usually one of 3 or less. Like I say, to get to Major League Baseball, a lot has to happen right. That's the important thing, is a lot has to happen right for you to get to be a finalist site. You have to prepare for a multi-party negotiation. We were sending emails around about one particular closing, which we had 11 attorneys involved. Another deal where there were 5 parties that were in the MOU and agreement. You got to know that walk point. Again, what goes from a good deal to a bad deal for you, and what is your limit on that from a political perspective and financial perspective. Confidentiality rules, and you got to recognize that every deal is different, so you need to rely on the experts and professionals to help you out. Economic development, your engineers and your consultants, and sometimes law firms as well too. So if you don't get selected, don't get upset. You did a lot right to get to this point. You need to ask for feedback, and you need to use the success of becoming a finalist to help build political momentum for that next prospect that will come along. I had a client once tell me, he said, work every deal until the very end, as you never know what you'll learn about your site of community that will help you land that next prospect. A perfect example is Mecklenburg County. They were a finalist for an Apple site. They ended up going to another state. Then Microsoft was looking at another place in the state. Then they were running into a site issue that was not disclosed, a CARS feature. and literally they were getting ready to leave and go to another state, and the state economic development official called them up and said, hey, you might want to look at this site in Mecklenburg County. And then less than 60 days later, they were closing the deal with those guys. So if they hadn't done all the prep work for Apple, they might not have landed at Microsoft. So what can you do to make your region and community competitive? You need to plan for and invest in your sites and infrastructure, and realize that those are the seeds of economic development. Again, realize speed to market matters. You got to embrace your assets. Be true to yourself. The worst thing you can do is try to be something you're not. Not everybody's going to be the next Rolls Royce or the next Amazon. So you need to understand what your locale is, who you are, and be true to that particular market. Realize it takes time and money to be competitive, and realize that your competition is being very, very aggressive. So are you going to be the one who loses by a nose, or are you going to be the one who wins by a nose? So some parting thoughts. I'm a big fan of Vince Lombardi, but I also like the statement, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity, by Seneca, the Roman philosopher. And then the one I love from Vince Lombardi is, the will to win is not nearly so important as the will to prepare to win. And that's a very big consideration there. Just real quick about Timmins Group, we do economic development, site certification programs, site selection and analysis studies, site and infrastructure assessments, master planning, site development, infrastructure development, GIS, geospatial services, and site ops and site logistics. So thank you for allowing me to get that in. And again, thank you for your time. I hope we have covered this within the allotted time frame, and I am open to questions at this point in time. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Joe. And we have questions, so everyone kind of keep typing them in. We'll try to get to what we can. Let's get going. So way back in the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned the vitamin shop.
Yes.
Did the vitamin shop facility have all zoning and other land related issues in place to allow the facility, this facility, when the governor announced it on August 31st? So did all that
yes,
back stuff, was that already all in place?
Sure. Actually, they had to go through and get a special use permit. What we see a lot of locales do, which is very interesting, is they will submit it as an IDA or an EDA or a separate legal entity with a separate name on it to go through the public process, so that they don't have to reveal the confidentiality of that particular prospect. In this particular case, they actually had to go get a special use permit, of which I'm pretty sure that they put it under a separate, like the Hanover County IDA was the one who submitted the site plans.
Okay. And in all of your practice, if you could say that there's one thing that causes a project to fall through on the 11th hour, what would it be?
Not disclosing all the information that you have about the site.
Could you go a little further?
Sure. Yeah, if one of the things we commonly see is, if people realize they have a wart on their site per se, is they don't want the prospect to know about that. So a lot of times, part of what our job is when we're working on behalf of the site selection consultants, prospects, to go out and try to figure out what those warts are, what those bogeys are. And sometimes people don't disclose, like say if there was a report done, a phase 1 report that shows that there's an environmental item to a site. So anything that can trip up a prospect like that. And one example is somebody had not cleared, even though they bought a piece of property, they had not cleared a old DOT right away. And in order for us to actually close the deal, we almost lost the deal on that, but they actually had to go track down the former landowner. It was an elderly lady, 89 years old, who was in a nursing home about 2 hours away. They were worried that maybe she had already deceased, and they were going to have to get in touch with her 3 kids to try to get that item cleared up. But literally, they found out about it. We got a survey done within 24 hours. Within 48 hours, they were in front of her with a legal agreement to basically remove that old VDOT right away, that old DOT right away from the site, and do a quick claim deed on it. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
And it's usually cultural resources and archaeological features are the ones that seem to kill a deal, or a Corps of Engineers wetland permit.
Okay. So going on with sort of this due diligence that you've been talking about, eliminating unknowns before they eliminate you, does this assume that a city urban renewal authority owns the land? Because what if they don't?
Okay, it's not so much ownership as property control. Okay, the most important thing that a prospect or site selection consultant needs to know is certainty, and it's certainty on two things: can you acquire the property, and then certainty of price. Okay, so as far as getting the due diligence items are concerned, you need to remove anything that can be an issue as far as the development is concerned, development timeline is concerned. That's going back to the example of what kills most deals. So if you haven't done the appropriate due diligence or you haven't disclosed the appropriate information, that can kill a deal. So in terms of an EDA or an urban redevelopment, you need to know what that set price is and have an option agreement, most likely have an option agreement with that property owner or property owner who's willing to set a price and not move off of it. What a lot of people do is they will actually wait for a prospect to show up, use a state or local government to be their marketing arm, and then literally they will jack their price up 3 or 4 times what it was, and that helps create a problem for them because they were trying to lock down a particular cost. So early on, the site selection consultants want to know what that price is so they can factor it into their business model and incentives model they're developing for a company.
Okay. And next question. Could you talk a little bit about proximity to freight movement by rail, air, water? So in other words, transportation needs outside of just truck. Does that really play into any of this?
Absolutely, it does. I mean, if you look at around, let's say the East Coast ports, and I'm sure the West Coast ports, the transportation, rail, and water infrastructure is very, very important. Okay, part of the reason why that's important, well, one thing to keep in mind about rail likes a long haul. They don't like to do a short haul. So if you're maybe within 100 miles of a port, the rails will need to see a lot of turns between the port and that particular site to justify them being able to serve that particular prospect or client. So that does play into it. Freight movement does play into it. Air does play into it significantly. You want a site that has good proximity to all those particular items. But again, there are other things that might be driving why somebody is locating someplace. I think Nucor Steel, basically, they want to go where they had old farmers in the Midwest who had a very strong work ethic because they can move their product like they want to. But again, getting access to those items are very important. So rail is important in terms of if you got to go a long way to get to your market, that's very important to rail from that aspect. And the ports play a significant role because a lot of companies, the world is truly flat. A lot of companies are international. We had a crankshaft manufacturer that was looking to locate from Germany over here in the U.S. They supplied all the major auto suppliers, but it was also important for them because that was going to become one of their flagship manufacturing facilities. They wanted to be able to ship back to Europe to get to their European customers as well too.
Great. And sort of playing off of that in terms of transportation needs, so who pays for transportation infrastructure when state DOTs are stretched pretty thin, whether it be upgrades or, just in terms of land traffic for trucks and things like that through the interstates, things of that nature?
There are a couple different funding sources out there. It's interesting because some states have what they call a transportation partnership type fund, where once a deal potentially is imminent, there are a lot of pots of money that become available. And for example, let's use Rolls-Royce as an example. That was such a critical project to the state that they made roughly $10 million available to make all the transportation improvements to serve the site. But again, it's all deal specific sometimes. Now, I understand everybody would like to be able to make all the transportation improvements, and DOTs are stretched. I think we're starting to see a trend where DOTs are going to be spending more money on maintenance of highways than they are on actual construction of highways, which is somewhat disconcerting because that's not the problem we want to be solving. We want to be improving highways and putting intersections and stuff like that in. So, I hate to say, not knowing where the question comes from, I think it's on a case-by-case basis. The best thing you can do is try to build the case for that intersection. We have one client who had a 1,300-acre site that literally was located right off the interstate, but they did not have an intersection in place, and they spent about 10 years going after federal and state funding, studying the interchange option, doing justification reports, and all those items before they finally got it funded. And literally, as soon as they got that interchange funded and built, they have almost sold out of their product in that 1,300-acre site. I believe they're about 70% sold out at this point in time.
Wow.
But it was very critical to their success,
Sure.
no doubt.
Okay. Okay, we will leave transportation for a moment. Could you please explain briefly what an environmental bank is?
Okay, an environmental bank is where you essentially build a wetlands or a stream bank such that you can sell open credits on the marketplace. In Virginia in particular, where this particular site was located, they have what they call HUC maps, or hydraulic unit code maps, that basically says if development occurs in one drainage area, you can go over to that drainage area or one drainage area next to you and buy credits from a bank. So if I'm going to build a development that's going to impact streams or wetlands, I have to go out and buy credits off of a mitigation bank. And essentially that's what an environmental bank is. It's a mitigation bank for both streams and or wetlands.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Are there any concerns about large projects featured in the case studies encouraging sprawling development, which is unsustainable? Are there ways to mitigate these issues?
The sprawling development issue has been one that has always kind of surprised me on some level, because I think it's as much a perception issue as it is a real issue. And I remember I was at a presentation in 2001 where the presenter brought up a local newspaper and he said, hey, urban sprawl, here it is all over the newspaper. And then he threw some stats out there that I thought were pretty interesting. And I went back and verified them based upon the 2000 census data. So if I haven't got them exactly right, please forgive me. But generally speaking, about 2.3 to 2.5% of the overall land mass in the United States is considered urban or city. About 7% is considered urban and suburban, rural residential, suburbs where people live. And then 93%, give or take, is considered to be rural. And I think that becomes very predominant out in the Midwest in particular, not in the Northeast, but out in the Midwest you can really see that, and maybe not along the coast of California. But the reality is roughly 85%, somewhere in that range, plus or minus, of the U.S. population lives in that 7% landmass. So from a density of development perspective, from an engineering side, you would rather have condensed development, transportation, water and sewer infrastructure, because your user base per dollar spent is significantly higher, therefore you generate potentially greater revenue. So I think there are areas where urban sprawl is a legitimate concern. Northern Virginia is one of them. If you don't address transportation issues to continue to move people, goods, and services back and forth, it will continue to be an issue. But as far as the mega sites are concerned, yeah, you're going to have that potential, but you got to weigh the downside of not having it versus having a significant user and investor coming there and maybe creating 2,000 jobs for your locale.
So with that, do you ever suggest municipalities, communities looking into doing a fiscal impact study? So one of the questions here is, if 100 new employees are moving into an area with their families, can the local schools, churches, fire department, and police department, etc., handle that influx? What do you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I did not put it in here, but we do fiscal impact studies. We work with Chimera Consulting to do a lot of fiscal impact studies. And I think it's important, again, it's another step to understand what those potential impacts are. So absolutely, I think that is an important thing to do. You can run multiple scenarios to understand, at least from a planning local government economic development perspective. You can say, okay, if this is our target market or this is our target industry, they create these types of jobs, paying these wages, and can you accommodate that in that locale? So you can run a fiscal impact model that essentially determines whether that target market will work for you or not from a planning perspective. So absolutely, I think those are good things to do. I think it's worthwhile for a locality to invest in that because again, it gives you more information up front to better understand how you have to deal with that from a planning perspective.
Great, thank you. Okay, I guess kind of going along with that, you touched lightly on workforce skills and desirability of the community insofar as amenities for the employees. I know of an instance where Bridgestone, located in a community, so a company is located in a community, but due to poor schools and lack of amenities, yeah, the management and many employees lived elsewhere. So I guess that just sort of kind of adds to the notion of conducting a study such as this to see if a community can even support something as this, you know, adding 100 employees to the local workforce. On the opposite side, could you talk a little bit about a community having an appropriate workforce for the type of company coming in? Are there enough, you know, the trade schools, the community colleges, whatever it's going to take, is there enough local labor to support a company coming in and needing to hire 200, 500 new employees? Can you touch on that a little?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll be the first to tell you that I'm not a workforce expert. I focus more on what it takes to get the product ready to go and whatnot. But I know, you know, my dad did a lot of economic development work as a volunteer back in the early '80s, and back then it was cheap labor, not highly skilled labor. Today, obviously, it's highly skilled labor. Pretty much every economic development conference I go to now is predominantly focused on the workforce gap and workforce issues and what we can do to close those. My personal opinion is when you're talking about 100 or 200 jobs, it matters to a certain degree, but if they're good, high quality, high paying jobs, you know, you can actually get people to locate to that particular facility and drive into that facility. You know, fortunately, we have a pretty good road system where we live and work and practice. So everything, you know, south of Fredericksburg, Virginia, people don't mind driving 30, 45 minutes to get to a particular job if that job is a good paying job. Now we know that a lot of community colleges are revamping their workforce training programs. You know, advanced manufacturing is definitely a different game than it was 20 years ago. Most of it is driven by computers now. So there are a lot of people companies who will invest in their facility in a community, and literally they'll like go get a machine control laser machine, tooling machine, and put it over to community colleges so they can train their workforce to essentially use that facility.
Okay, thank you. And I know just for those of you on the call, if you're more interested in things like that, we have had some past webinars that have discussed more about the workforce development and just what you're talking about, that the hiring comes in with the people behind the scenes, the people that are creating the computers, that are creating the product. That sort of new shift dynamic of how we're hiring some of these people and what they're doing. They're not necessarily on the floor anymore. They're behind the scenes creating the products that are on the floor now. So we have had past webcasts on that. If you go to our YouTube channel, you can search through and find those. Okay, another question. All right, let's talk about a site that is not zoned at all. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? And this includes adjacent sites that are also unzoned. What do we think about this?
Not a good thing. There are multiple layers that go into zoning a piece of property. First, the locality has to look at their comprehensive plan. So some localities have to update that every 5 to 10 years. If you are trying to land a prospect, property not being zoned is going to get you eliminated. It's that simple. If you know, 99 out of 100 times, I would say that's what's going to happen. So very rarely is a piece of property so attractive that somebody's willing to wait 6 to 9 months to put it through a rezoning process for that to happen. So if the property does have significant development potential, I think you need to start putting it through the public process sooner than later. The less restrictive zoning you have on it, the better off you are. What a lot of the local officials want to do is they want to put a special use permit, conditional use permit process in place, which I think is fine as long as you can run it through the process pretty quickly. And that can be maybe just an exception, but maybe a publicly approved process, but not a public hearing type process where citizens can come in and raise Cain. I don't care where you are, you're always going to have somebody, a vocal minority, who's going to be opposed to anything that is being done. And site selectors, and us in particular, we like to avoid those communities just because there's a lot of time and effort that goes into making that decision, and there's a lot of risk associated with rezoning a piece of property if it's not zoned appropriately for what you're looking to do, or to the point where you can get a conditional or special use permit.
Okay, great. Next question. This is good. So as a community prepares itself to get into the game, what type of information should communities put on their economic development websites to get them in the hunt? And I guess with that, do you have any examples of some really great websites that you've seen from communities?
Sure, and I can put together a list of those websites so that you can send it out, Christine, to people. Yeah, actually, the website makes a big difference, and you know, the information you want to put as much information out there as you feel comfortable putting out there, but it's kind of an art form. You got to put enough information out there to make it the community show well, and to make prospects and individuals understand, site selection consultants understand that you are ready to go, you're ready to make a deal, you're very pro-economic development friendly, you're very pro-business friendly. That's the most important thing. And is information readily available? Can they get to contact somebody? Usually I think it's like a 2 or 3 click rule. If they can't get to the information they want in 2 or 3 clicks, then it is not readily available to them. One of the things that I find that is frustrating at times is when you go onto a local government website or an economic development website and you're looking for contact information and it's buried. You can't find an address, you can't find a phone number, you can't find an email. And then the Director of Economic Development might not have his email available. So what do? The email that you get is info@xyzcounty.com. And so lacking information like that is only going to hurt you. It's not going to help you. So you need to be readily available. You need to make whatever information you feel comfortable having available on the website, or letting people know what you have available and that it's really just a click or a phone call away, an email or a phone call away for them to get access to that information. So, but I'll help put together a list of websites that I think are good, and we'll forward that to you, Christine, so you can send it out to everybody who's listening to the webinar.
Sure, will do. Great, thank you. What are current target prospects for an older city with existing infrastructure and blue-collar labor supply, but older, possibly vacant buildings and sites, which is, I mean, it's, to be honest, a great amount of the communities that are out there right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting trend to be watching what's going on with a lot of urban cores now, and there's a lot of redevelopment, brownfield redevelopment. Ironically, I was emailing my environmental, one of my environmental guys was emailing earlier about saying, hey, there's grant funding available for brownfield redevelopment. Let's make sure we got all our clients in queue to go after these $50,000 grants so that they can do studies to figure out what they need to do to redevelop a site. Stone Brewing is actually going to an old facility that was essentially an old gasworks facility. That's going right next to what essentially was an urban redevelopment project. So once you start redeveloping those cores, and again, we're starting to see a trend of that happening now, it actually is pretty phenomenal transformation that will take place. So if you can get 1 or 2 really good opportunities to redevelop that core urban area, and what's great is, and what I really love about it is, there's a lot of infrastructure there that already exists. You just sometimes got to get it cleaned up to the point that you're removing the headache for somebody else. There's also a lot of potential environmental issues with that. So again, you need to know what your due diligence items are, and you need to know what your bogeys are that can kill you. But invest that money in that due diligence and figure out what it's going to take to develop it. It might not be a good site to redevelop, or you might be able to come up with a simple environmental solution that can take care of whatever issue appears to exist on that particular site, and realize it's not as costly to develop as you would like. But absolutely, I love the infill redevelopment. It is going on across the country. I think it's phenomenal, and I think it's great.
At least here in the Cleveland area, we have a lot of, in our urban core, we have a lot of these sort of pop-up short-term leases, these startup companies that are kind of coming in and taking over,
Incubators.
bottom floors, couple floors. Some of them end up staying for a long while, but, some don't. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think in the end it's helpful or not if they come in for 6 months to a year to do these incubator projects and then leave? What are your thoughts?
Oh, I think it's absolutely helpful. And I mean, anytime you can have positive traction and positive things going on, it's great. And I believe there was a company that just redeveloped. I can't think of the name of the company off the top of my head. Maybe Zoros that redeveloped the old Las Vegas municipal building. And I believe it was a 60 Minutes, might have been a 60 Minutes news article, another news article out there on that. But they basically took over this existing municipal facility and they turned it into a hip, cool place for their people to work. Even took the old jail and turned that into a fitness room. So, I think any activity like that is good. Any activity from young entrepreneurs is good. It's part of it is trying to capture that intellectual capital. And anytime you can get startup companies there, those guys are young, they're creative, they're aggressive. Exposure to being somewhere for 6 months in incubator space is only going to help you. And making it as positive an experience as you can for those particular companies is going to do nothing but benefit you in the long term.
Yeah, it benefits me too because a lot of them are breweries and speakeasies that are coming in and brewing their own goods. So it's fine with me. I love it. Okay, well, on that note,
Absolutely.
let's go ahead and end on that good note, shall we? It's right around
All
2:30,
right.
and I know that there's still tons of questions. We could go on, Joe, for an hour still and talk about this, but we do have to stop, and it is Friday, and so thank you for joining us this afternoon. We appreciate it, and once you send me over your PowerPoint, I will get it up into a PDF onto our website, ohioplanning.org/planning webcast, and a recording of it will be on our YouTube channel as well. Just search Planning Webcast on YouTube, and when Joe gets the list of community or economic development sites that look good, he'll send those over to me, and I can send those out to everyone and post it on our website as well. So again, thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you, Economic Development Division, and thank you, Joe Hines of the Timmins Group, for joining us this afternoon.
Absolutely. It was a
And
pleasure.
we will talk to everyone next time. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.